Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Let's get back to some Final Fantasy X goodness. Today I'm talking about Final Fantasy X-2. Now I can't really talk about the premise of this game without spoiling the ending of Final Fantasy X. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and play the game first and then watch my casual review of that and then watch my casual review of this one. To set up Final Fantasy X-2, there is I think it's like 10 to 15 minute short little video just setting up the premise of Final Fantasy X-2. You gotta watch Final Fantasy X Eternal Calm. Now, this takes place 2 years after the events of Final Fantasy X, and it just kind of shows where everyone is, and Yuna gets called to action again after seeing this staticky footage from a sphere. In the first one, spheres are kind of like recordings they're basically like video recordings that you can do, but it doesn't have like the best video reception, so things get really staticky, kind of blurry, kind of harder to tell what's going on. The resolution isn't there. But she uncovers this footage on the sphere that Riku brings, and the sphere has footage of Titus, or at least it looks like it appears to be Titus. We can't really tell, so that is called to action because at the end of Final Fantasy X, Titus basically dies. He basically like dissolves into the ether because essentially he's like a dream. He's not even a real person. So he's gone, and Yuna is very sad because, you know, they loved each other, and so the chance of being able to see Titus once more brings her to action. During these last 2 years, she's basically been like the prophet, essentially, because she's the one who set up the Eternal Calm. She's the one that defeated Sin for all time. He's not going to reappear. She's basically like a prophet that people will go to and ask for help and guidance, and she's just kind of sick of it because she wants to kind of do something for her own for once. So she drops her prophet-like status to go explore the world and uncover more knowledge about where she might be able to find Titus. And there's something almost romantic about that, because when you think about the events of Final Fantasy X, she was prepared to lay down her lives, as all summoners are, to just stave off Sin for 10 years in order to give the world of Spira calm for 10 more years. But as it's revealed through the events of Final Fantasy X, she has to basically give up her life to do so, and she was very prepared to. She voluntarily did that, and now that she's gone through all of this stuff, she's kind of ready to just do something more for herself. Even though people might be let down because they look up to her for guidance, she's kind of ready to just, you know, lay down arms and just do what she wants for once. Having watched that, we hop right into Final Fantasy X-2, and this starts out with a bang. It's a cinematic of Yuna having a big pop concert at the Blitzball Stadium with her two girlfriends, Pain and Riku. Now, it turns out that this wasn't actually Yuna, but it was someone who had Yuna's dress sphere. This is basically like, it changes your clothing and your class, basically, but it was someone posing as Yuna, so it wasn't necessarily Yuna, but it definitely sets off the whole tone of this game. Very poppy, very lighthearted. It almost reminds me of like a Saturday morning 90s cartoon, where we're not going to dive too much into some heavy, serious stuff. It's a lot about like being a little goofy and a little silly. The bad guys are all very cartoonish and kind of dorky. Just the whole tone of those like 90s cartoons is very much the tone here for Final Fantasy X-2, which I think it doesn't age that well. It feels very dated at this point. In some places, Final Fantasy X also did feel pretty dated, but it also had a nice weighty story to it. Like, the characters felt relatable, where I feel like the characters in this game are more cartoonish and shallow. There's just not like any weight to it. There's not a whole lot of deep levels for me to really care what's going on in the story and with these characters, other than Yuna, who I already had this attachment to because of the events of Final Fantasy X. Like, don't get me wrong, I still feel like there's a time and a place for a goofier game like this, but when you juxtapose it to Final Fantasy X, it doesn't even hold a candle to it, because the story in Final Fantasy X was so amazing, whereas the plot in this one is not so much. So let me get more into the plot. You are playing as 3 women. You are playing as Yuna, Riku, and a new character introduced into this one, Pain. And Pain is kind of like your more moody, edgy, gothy type of girl, kind of a little more serious. Kind of takes the place of Lulu in the first one. And you are a group of sphere hunters. You each have your own reasons to be hunting down spheres. Yuna is kind of more looking for hints about Titus, and the others' motivations are more like mostly to help out Yuna, but they each have their own kind of motivation as well. And you are flying around in this big aircraft that was uncovered from the Al Bhed, and you are aided with 3 men who pilot the ship. So you're not controlling these 3 guys to fight, but you do come into contact with them quite a lot, and they are kind of more main characters here. There's Buddy, there's Brother, and then there's the other one. I forget his name already. So they're not too important here. The main characters are these 3 women. So where the first one felt like you are going on a pilgrimage, you're going on a journey. It's you and a group of your guardians, and you're going around getting all of these aeons, and you are on a epic quest. It is a set path the way that you are going for this pilgrimage. In this one, you are bouncing all over the place, because it's more like you have all these different teleportation spots that you can go and revisit these spots of spirit. And when I say revisit, I mean like the exact places that you visited in Final Fantasy X, because they reuse a lot of the main areas, like same pathways, same layouts, everything. They reused a lot of assets in here from Final Fantasy X. So it feels really lazy, because I've already seen most of this stuff already. Even like the enemies are the same, the character models are the same, the pathways are the same. It's all very samey, and so it ends up feeling like I've just already kind of done this, but now it's just with a goofier tone. Now, the combat itself is different than the first one. This takes more of an active turn-based combat, where instead of in Final Fantasy X, it's like you attack, then I wait, and for you to attack me, and then I attack you, and it's back and forth. In this one, each character has like this speed meter, and when this meter fills up, you are able to do an action. So the enemies aren't going to wait for you to attack. You're just supposed to attack whenever those meters fill up. Your characters can take an action. And so I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this active turn-based combat, because one, you don't have time to really sit down and strategize what you're going to do. You have to know exactly where to go on the menus for all 3 of your characters, and exactly what you want to do. Otherwise, you're wasting time, because the enemy is going to attack you whether you attack them or not. That's just the way that this goes. So a lot of the time you're kind of forced to just do like the strongest attack over and over again. Now, near the end of the game, when I did have a white mage, I was able to like hurry and cast Protect and Shell on my characters to give them extra defense. And there's strategy here, but it doesn't give you enough time to utilize that strategy and really think out a plan. So you're more forced to rush through the game. Now, this made the combat itself a lot less tedious, because it was very quick, and I feel like they plan on you not really taking the time to strategize, because I felt like the combat in general was a lot easier than it was in Final Fantasy X. I didn't have to grind nearly as much, although for a couple of the last bosses, I did have to take some time to grind up some XP and level up my characters, but not nearly as much as I did in Final Fantasy X. This is also nice because you only have 3 characters that you have to level up, and the leveling up system is different than in Final Fantasy X. Basically, you level up, your stats will go up. Now, don't feel like you're limited because you only have these 3 characters. You are able to change the classes of these 3 characters on the fly. Now, the more you utilize this class, the more abilities that you do unlock for that class. So typically, you want to stick with maybe maxing only like 1 or 2 different classes for all 3 of your characters. But there are some additional strategies here, because without going too much into the nitty-gritty, you have these sphere grids, and if you change into all of the classes on the sphere grid, you are able to activate this like super powerful mode. And this just felt like a lot of setup. I typically didn't utilize this, but I feel like it would definitely be a good way to go if you were really min-maxing here and wanting to do a lot of the end game stuff. Maybe you want to look into active activating the super dress sphere for all of your characters. But for me, though, I just kind of kept it simple, just like one dress sphere for each character, and then when I max that, then I would start leveling up a different dress sphere. Yuna herself has completely changed combat-wise. In the first game, she played more as your healer, your white mage, and she was also a summoner, so she could summon these huge, awesome Aeons to help you fight. Well, because of the end of Final Fantasy X, those events, you can no longer have Aeons, and so Yuna has completely dropped her staff, her prophet mage-like ways. Now she's picked up 2 pistols, because why not? And at first, I was a little thrown off, like, whoa, okay, this is a complete change of character, because Yuna is so soft-spoken, and she is so gentle, and so picking up 2 pistols just feels so out of character. But when you think about the whole events during the Final Fantasy X Eternal Calm video, it kind of grew on me, because it's very much like shutting down serving other people. You're very much like you're doing things for yourself, so it's kind of like breaking free of her typical mold, and the dual pistols definitely grew on me. Now, like I said, she doesn't have to stick with the 2 pistols. You could totally change her dress sphere to be a white mage if you want, but I like the idea of her shedding her staff and her magical abilities in favor of guns, because why not? Because they're cool. So you're bouncing around Spira, you're fighting guys, you're collecting these spheres, hunting down clues in order to figure out what's going on with Titus, but that's not really like the main kind of plot here. It's kind of like I'm going to go around Spira and just go on these adventures and hope that I do stumble across certain clues in order to find where Titus is. The main plot that's going on in Spira right now are 2 groups have developed after the events of the Eternal Calm started, and these 2 groups, New Yevon and the Youth League, have spurned up, and so these 2 groups are often at battle with each other, and it's kind of like your job to well, at first Yuna doesn't really want to have anything to do with these 2 groups. She just wants to go on her own adventure, do her own thing, and eventually she kind of gets wrapped up into keeping peace between these 2 groups. Now, you're able to make certain choices throughout the game. The game is very mission-based structured, so you fly to a certain spot of Spira, you fight the boss, and you go to a different location. It's very like go wherever you want, but throughout the game you are given these choices, and one of them is like basically like, do you want to side with New Yevon or do you want to side with the Youth League? And I'm not sure how much of a difference these decisions make throughout the gameplay, so I can't really attest to how much the story changes depending on your choices, but I ended up siding with New Yevon, and it kind of seems like they're both bad choices, so either way you're gonna make the wrong choice here. But yeah, you're just going to like the same locations of these missions over and over again. Now, they do branch some things out, like you're able to jump on platforms and climb on certain locations, but it still feels very limited, just like Final Fantasy X. You're going down the same pathways you already did in Final Fantasy X, so it just feels lazy. Now, they did add a couple of other things, like there's a monster training mechanic. Basically, from what I understand, I only looked at the tutorial, I didn't really dive into this because I just wanted to level up the 3 women, but you are able to capture these monsters and basically level them up, kind of like Pokemon is how I understand it, but I didn't really dive too much into that, so I can't really attest to what that's like. Just tonally, like as far as the story goes, obviously that's different, and the music matches it too. It's very poppy and rock with this electric guitar, and it's kind of fun with some more trumpets. And like I said, there's a time and place for this, but I'd rather have more of the tone of Final Fantasy X if I am playing the sequel to Final Fantasy X. This game also has a rumble feature, which I didn't know PlayStation 2 had, but if you go in the menus, you can turn on the rumble, so that's nice. I feel like at this time and place, they didn't really know how to utilize the rumble, so it's very hit or miss. A lot of the times I even forget that this game has rumble until I'm watching like a cutscene cinematic where the jets of my aircraft will start going, and I feel a rumble, and I'm like, oh yeah, there is a rumble, but I feel like in combat, there's no rumble at all. My total time played was significantly shorter than Final Fantasy X. It was only 16 hours, and I feel like only 16 hours is still a lot, but like compared to the 40 hours that I put into Final Fantasy X, this isn't nearly as long. However, because the gameplay and the story didn't hook me as it did in Final Fantasy X, it's in some ways this game felt longer than that one. You know, in my first casual review, I was talking about how iconic and important Final Fantasy X is to a lot of people. I feel like this game is not nearly as well beloved. In fact, this one, oftentimes people will tell you to just skip this one, and I kind of have to agree. I would give this game the score of 2 out of 5. I would only really play this out of curiosity if you were really invested in Final Fantasy X, but maybe not, because if you love Final Fantasy X so much, I don't think you will love this, because it's almost like a completely different game. So we've racked up a lot of Final Fantasy time. Don't think we are done yet, though, because I still have to play through Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission, and I'm not exactly sure what this is. I'm not sure if it's like its own standalone game, or if it was supposed to be like a standalone expansion. Either way, I do know that this game will take significantly less time than Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X-2. So tune in next time for Final Fantasy X-2 Last Mission, and then we'll wrap this Final Fantasy X marathon up. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Final Fantasy X-2, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!